Chapter 1. The Guest Who Lies. Dominic Stone stepped out of the Blacktown car and into the lingering light of a late Californian afternoon, the vineyard winds brushing the collar of his navy overcoat. From the gravel lot, the Moreau Hotel rose before him like a reluctant heirloom, beautiful, slightly worn, but proud. Terracotta walls wrapped in creeping ivy. Arched windows with lace curtains half drawn. A carved wooden sign swung above the entryway, its lettering faded by decades of sun. The Moreau. Est. Itinjo by Saint-Char. He paused, letting the air settle around him. It smelled of lavender and stone, with a thread of citrus twisting through the breeze. The scent wasn't part of the real estate report, but now he couldn't ignore it, just like the way the place refused to look like a business opportunity. It looked like memory. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt, the steel of his watch catching the light. Don't romanticize it, he told himself. It's just wood and mortar. A ledger waiting to be balanced. Inside, the lobby was smaller than he expected, intimate, like someone's well-kept living room. Beams of honey-colored light fell through stained glass, pooling over worn Persian rugs and high-backed leather chairs. The chandelier above was crooked, the kind of flaw that made a place real. Music played softly from a record player in the corner. Sinatra, he thought. At the check-in counter, a woman stood with her head tilted to one side, flipping through a paper ledger. Not a computer in sight. Not even a keypad. Charming. Archaic. And wildly inefficient. She looked up, and the air changed. Her eyes, blue like frost under moonlight, landed on him with startling precision. She was elegant without trying, high cheekbones dusted with sun. Dark curls pinned into a loose twist at the nape of her neck, a linen blouse tucked into slate-gray trousers that hugged her waist with effortless grace. "Welcome to the Moreau," she said. Her voice was smooth, low, but not inviting. Warm, with an edge. Like a fireplace with iron gates. Dominic allowed himself the smallest smile. "Thank you. Reservation for Daniel Shore." She paused. Her eyes flicked to the ledger. "Shore. We don't get many shorelines in Napa." "It's a pen name," he replied easily. "I'm a travel writer. Supposed to be reviewing boutique spots in the valley." Half-truths were always more effective. She nodded slowly. "Ah, the wine writer's retreat. Room 3. My best view. You're lucky we're nearly full this weekend." She slid an antique key across the counter. An actual key. No barcode. No magnetic swipe. The metal felt cold and deliberate in his palm. "I'm Clara," she added. "Clara Moreau. I manage the place." So this was her. The woman who had refused 5 increasingly generous offers. The woman who told his acquisition team via a handwritten letter, no less, that she'd rather see the hotel sink into the vines than sell it to a faceless corporation. She looked so sure of herself. So grounded. It was irritating. "I've heard about you," he said before thinking. "Oh?" One brow arched, amused. "From who?" Dominic blinked. "Bloggers. Travelers. Industry whispers." Clara leaned slightly forward on her elbows. Her gaze didn't flinch. "Be careful with whispers. They're usually just other people's regrets." That got to him more than it should have. He turned away, gesturing toward the lounge. "Beautiful lobby. My father designed it himself," she said. "He believed that public spaces should feel like memory. Private rooms should feel like escape." "And does yours?" Dominic asked. Clara stilled. "I haven't had an escape in a long time, Mr. Shore." She smiled then, but it was a smile drawn with fine lines, not softness. "Enjoy your stay." Dominic walked slowly toward the staircase, key warm now in his hand, her words playing back like a jazz riff that wouldn't quite resolve. She hasn't had an escape in a long time. Neither had he. Upstairs, room 3 held more story than design. Wooden floors with threads of warmth left by afternoon sun. A window that opened onto a view of the vineyard slopes curling down the valley like spilled velvet. A vintage armchair beside a stone fireplace, and a record player on the desk, its grooves already spinning softly with a jazz instrumental. A saxophone caught mid-sigh. Dominic dropped his leather duffel on the bed and sat in the chair, elbows on knees, hands steepled. This wasn't what I expected. He was used to clean deals. Fast transactions. Buildings made of glass and steel that held no ghosts, no dreams. This place. It ached of intention. 100 small touches whispering that someone cared. He closed his eyes. Clara Moreau was not just an obstacle. She was the soul of the building. And to take the hotel, he would have to tear her away from herself. And for the first time in his career, Dominic Stone felt the weight of that truth press against his ribs. He stood abruptly, walked to the window, and opened it. The air was cooler now, charged with the coming storm the radio had predicted. Wind played with the vines below. A single orange leaf spiraled past the glass, dancing its way to the ground. Clara watched from the office window as her new guest leaned against the balcony railing of room 3. His silhouette was still, contemplative, as if the land whispered things he was trying to understand. There was something strange about him, Daniel Shore, if that was even his name. He carried himself like someone who didn't belong here. His shoes alone, austerely polished leather Oxfords, spoke of boardrooms and strategy, not vineyard soil. He had the look of a man accustomed to control, and yet he'd seemed momentarily disarmed in the lobby, like he'd stepped into a memory and forgotten the lines. Clara turned away from the window, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't have the time or energy for intrigue. The hotel's plumbing needed inspection again. The wine cellar was humidifying unevenly, and her accountant had just confirmed they had only 4 months runway left without another surge in bookings. Still, she kept thinking about his eyes, how they had scanned the room not with critique, but with a hunger she couldn't name. Not désir. Not yet. But recognition, maybe. Downstairs, Dominic wandered the halls with the disarming casualness of a man who had already mapped every floor plan. The corridor walls were lined with black and white photographs, guests dancing at New Year's Eve galas, a couple clinking glasses beside a piano, Clara as a teenager beside her father, both covered in paint from restoring a mural in the lounge. Dominic paused at that one. Clara's smile in the photo was lopsided. Her curls a mess. Her shirt splattered with cobalt and gold. Her father's hand rested protectively on her shoulder. The mural behind them, a vineyard under a thunderous sky, was still on the far wall of the lounge. He had seen it an hour ago but hadn't looked closely. He walked back, slowly. The mural stretched 12 feet wide, sweeping across the plaster with aching precision. Grapevines twisted in emerald and ochre, curling around figures that blended realism and myth harvesters with golden skin. Lovers pressed between cypress trees. In the corner, a storm gathered in thick brushstrokes, and under it, a woman stood alone with a lantern raised toward the rain. Dominic stepped closer. The woman's face resembled Clara's subtly, hauntingly. "You found her," said a voice behind him. "Clara." He turned, caught off guard. She wore a navy apron over her clothes now, her hands dusted with flour. The scent of rosemary and sourdough clung to her. "Your father painted this?" Dominic asked. Clara nodded, arms crossed gently. He was a hotelier by trade, but an artist in his soul. He said every wall should earn its space. Dominic nodded slowly, hands behind his back. "It's remarkable. Feels eternal. Like something that was always meant to be there." Clara tilted her head. "You speak like a man who sees more than he admits." The silence stretched. Dominic stepped forward, lowering his voice just slightly. "And what do you see, miss?" "Moreau?" Clara held his gaze. "A man trying very hard not to touch anything, for fear he'll break it. A pause. Too accurate. Too fast." Before he could answer, a crack of thunder rolled in from the hills, low and distant. The light outside dimmed suddenly, shadows leaping across the mural's face. Clara glanced toward the window. The storm's coming early. Dominic looked out with her. The sky had turned a deep bruised gray, clouds piling like tidal waves over the valley ridge. "Should I worry about flooding?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Only if you brought a conscience." An hour later, the rain had started. Not a gentle drizzle, but a full-on orchestral overture of water against glass and wind through trees. Dominic sat in the lounge, nursing a glass of Bordeaux, something Clara had recommended, something he hadn't dared to refuse. He had made his career through clean takeovers, commercial properties, failing tech startups, stripped down and rebranded. But this place, it wasn't failing. It was fragile. Like a bird refusing to migrate, still believing spring would return. His phone buzzed. Marcus Lang. He answered quickly and quietly. "You're late checking in," Marcus said. "What's the status?" Dominic lowered his voice. "The hotel's not structurally modern, but it's holding. We'd have to gut the core. Demolition's cleaner. And the owner? The woman? She's complicated." A beat of silence. "Dom," Marcus said, "don't let your artistic sensibilities cloud the goal. This is just a stepping stone. You're 3 acquisitions away from the charter project. Don't get soft over bricks and French lace." Dominic looked toward the fire crackling in the hearth. Clara's voice floated in from the kitchen soft, laughing with a staff member. "Understood," he said tightly. "I'll finish the review by Sunday." He ended the call before Marcus could respond. Later, as thunder shook the windows, Clara brought him a bowl of soup in the lounge. "The kitchen's half flooded," she said casually, "but my chef would rather drown than send out a cold bisque." Dominic accepted it with a murmur of thanks. She sat down across from him, cradling a mug of tea. For a while, they listened to the rain. Then Dominic asked, "Why not sell?" Her eyes lifted to his, calm but clear. "Because legacy isn't for sale. And because some walls still remember how to hold people, not just money." Her words slipped into him like ink into paper. Dominic nodded once, solemn. "That's rare. Most people I meet have already sold themselves. They just haven't read the receipt." She smiled sadly, beautifully. "Maybe you're not most people." For a fleeting moment, he wished she were right. Chapter 2. Shadows Before the Storm. The morning after the rain began, the sky remained the color of pewter. Mist hovered low over the vineyard slopes, weaving between the cypress trees like a secret. From the east-facing windows of the Moreau Hotel, it looked like the land itself had forgotten how to breathe. Clara stood on the back terrace with her hands curled around a chipped mug of black coffee. The terrace overlooked what used to be the ballroom garden, now a modest courtyard blooming with rosemary, honeysuckle, and memory. Her father had called it the living history wing. She liked to start her mornings there, among the plants. It was the only place left untouched by renovations, contractors, and all the decisions that had to be made with gritted teeth. It was her ritual, one she had never shared until she noticed footsteps behind her. "You're up early," Dominic said, his voice low and rough with sleep. Clara didn't turn around immediately. Instead, she took another sip and exhaled. "This place doesn't let you sleep in." He stepped beside her, not too close. "That's one of the things I'm starting to like." Clara arched a brow, finally meeting his eyes. "Are you saying you didn't like it at first?" "I didn't expect to," he admitted. And there it was, his honesty, slipping in unannounced again. He hadn't told her much about himself since arriving, but when he did speak, it felt clean, devoid of charm, yet strangely disarming. She narrowed her eyes. "You talk like someone who's been told too often what to like." Dominic smiled, just barely. "Guilty." The wind lifted a strand of her hair, and he almost reached for it before thinking better. "You don't strike me as someone who follows rules," she said. "I follow the ones that make sense." He looked out toward the valley. "And rewrite the ones that don't." Her mug lowered slightly. "That's convenient." "It's effective." A silence stretched between them, not cold, but watchful. The kind of silence that comes when two people realize they're circling something too big to name. Clara broke it first. "Come on. I'll show you the cellar." The wine cellar was carved directly into the hillside, cooled by the natural embrace of earth and stone. The walls were slick with age, glistening faintly beneath hanging Edison bulbs. Rows of aged bottles lined the oak shelves, labels written in French, German, Napa's finest, and a few from her father's private collection, which she rarely touched. As they descended the stairs, Dominic trailed a hand along the stone wall. "This feels like a vault." "It is," Clara said. "For things that take time to become valuable." He glanced at her, and again she felt the quiet tug between them, that friction where admiration and resistance scraped against each other. She stopped before a small locked cabinet. "These," she said, producing a key from around her neck, were never for guests. The door creaked open to reveal 6 bottles, dusty, labelless, hand-sealed in black wax. Dominic's brows lifted. "Your father's?" Clara nodded. "Every vintage he made with his own hands. One for every year," he said. "The hotel survived something it shouldn't have." Dominic crouched to get a better look. "Storms, fires, pandemics?" "And once," Clara added, "a bank's attempted foreclosure." He stood slowly, something like guilt creeping into his posture. "You were here for that?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I was in grad school. I flew back the moment he called. I told him I'd stay a week. That was 8 years ago." Dominic watched her now, not with curiosity, but with regret, as if each detail she offered weighed more than he knew how to carry. "I imagine he was proud," Dominic said softly. "He died before he could tell me." Her voice didn't break, but her gaze faltered, just for a moment. "So I tell myself." Dominic looked at the floor. "You don't owe anyone this place, you know." She stiffened. "No, but I owe him, and I owe myself." They stood in the silence that followed stone, wine, dust, and the heavy thrum of something building in the distance. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Later that day, Dominic returned to his room. He needed space to think, needed to remind himself why he was here. He pulled out his laptop and clicked open the file labeled Project Cascade. It was the proposed architectural rendering of the new resort. A glass and steel monument, cold and curved, wrapping over the valley like a claw. Dominic stared at it, jaw clenched. It was efficient, profitable, ambitious. It was also a betrayal. He tapped open a second tab, a confidential dossier Marcus had assembled on Clara. Bank statements, estimated liabilities, and a string of private emails from an internal leak. It was all legal, and completely inhuman. Dominic felt the bile rise in his throat. He clicked it closed. His phone buzzed. "Marcus Lang again," Dominic answered, voice flat. "Yes." "Well?" Marcus asked, impatient. "Have you cracked her yet?" "She's not a nut," Dominic snapped. "She's a human being." "Not our problem," Marcus said coolly. "Your job is to close this deal. Fast. Board review's coming up, and we need this asset flipped before Q4. Dominic didn't respond. "Tell her the storm damage disqualifies her insurance. Offer her half price and cash it out," Marcus continued. "She'll cave. They always do." Dominic's eyes hardened. "She's not one of them, Marcus. A pose. A dangerous one. You're not getting attached, are you?" Dominic ended the call without answering. He walked to the window. Outside, the storm clouds had thickened, casting bruises across the hills. A hawk hovered far above the vines, wings held steady against the rising wind. He didn't sleep that night. And when morning came and the mudslide rolled down the hill, taking the only access road with it, Dominic Stone realized this hotel had just become his prison. And maybe, just maybe, his confession box. By mid-morning, the power flickered twice, then surrendered entirely. The hum of modern life vanished, replaced by the soft hush of wind and the distant groan of tree branches bowing under storm weight. A low fog blanketed the hills beyond the Moreau Hotel, and the staff huddled in the kitchen, whispering as if loud voices might provoke the weather. Clara lit the emergency lanterns, brass-framed glass relics her father had collected, and placed them along the halls. Their glow painted warm puddles of gold onto the parquet floors and made the shadows longer, more theatrical. When she found Dominic standing in the parlor, he looked strangely at home, like a portrait come to life. He had shed his blazer for a soft navy sweater, the collar of his dress shirt open at the throat, sleeves pushed to his elbows. He was studying a painting over the fireplace, a watercolor of the vineyard at dusk. "You lost power," he said, as though it was a surprise. "We always do," Clara replied, placing a lantern on the side table. "The generator's a relic, too." He turned toward her, his eyes catching the flame's reflection. "And the road?" "Mudslide took it. Northbound's gone. South is blocked by fallen cypress." She lifted a shoulder. "We're stranded for now. 2 days. Maybe 3. Dominic smiled dryly. Should I be concerned about food rations? Cannibalism? Only if you're rude, Clara replied, and he laughed, quiet and unexpected, like a piano key pressed in an empty room. I'll try to behave. She motioned to the hearth. It's warm here. And the kitchen's still functional. You're welcome to wait it out by the fire. Dominic hesitated only a second before settling into the velvet chair. Clara sat opposite, drawing her legs beneath her as she cradled her tea. Between them, the room breathed with the crackle of flame and the weight of unspoken things. For a long while, they said nothing. Rain traced silver veins across the tall windows. A log popped in the fire, releasing the sharp scent of pine resin. Clara watched Dominic with curiosity. She didn't try to hide. She had spent years around guests, politicians, artists, honeymooners, but none had made silence feel this intimate. Dominic, for his part, seemed comfortable letting the quiet stretch. In truth, he needed the stillness. It softened his thoughts, blurred the edges of his armor. He reached into the side table drawer, found a deck of cards, and raised it. You play? Clara raised an eyebrow. Poker or truth games? Dealer's choice. She slid her cup aside, pulled a chair closer to the coffee table, and nodded. They played for over an hour. No money, just points and wagers of pride. Your poker face is terrible, he said after her second loss. She narrowed her eyes. I'm letting you win. You're bluffing. He smirked. Ironically, better than you play. She laughed, truly laughed this time, and Dominic swore it moved something in the structure of the room. Her laugh was warm honey stirred into red wine. Unexpected, heady. So what do you actually do, mister? Sure? She asked between hands. Besides mock strangers in candlelit hotels. He hesitated. The lie was already written. He'd recited it dozens of times. Travel writer for an online lifestyle magazine. But under her gaze so direct, so disarmingly human, he faltered. Consulting, he said instead. High-end ventures. Sometimes real estate. Clara's expression didn't shift, but a small stillness entered her posture. You scout? She asked. Sometimes, he said. Though not here. That, at least, was not a lie, not anymore. She watched him closely, but said nothing. Perhaps she sensed something fracturing beneath his words. Perhaps she'd already seen more than he wanted. They ended the game in a truce. Clara stood and began gathering the cards, her fingers brushing against his. It lasted a second. Maybe less. But Dominic felt the contact echo through his body like the aftershock of thunder. Her skin was cool and dry, the touch delicate but steady. She didn't pull away quickly, didn't flinch. Just allowed the moment to pass like a note held just beyond the bar. I should check on the staff, she said softly. Dominic nodded, clearing his throat. Of course. As she turned, he found his voice again. Clara. She looked back. You're not what I expected. She tilted her head. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It's supposed to be honest. Something flickered in her gaze, surprise, then something else. Vulnerability, maybe. Or fear. Or worse. Hope. She gave him a quiet, unreadable smile and left the room. That night, Dominic lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. Rain tapped the glass steadily, like someone trying to be let in. He couldn't sleep. Everything about the Moreau had begun to haunt him. The mural, the garden, the way Clara said legacy isn't for sale. He wasn't just evaluating a property anymore. He was living inside someone's grief. And strangely, it felt like penance. He didn't want to want her. But he did. Not for her beauty, though that was undeniable. Not even for her intelligence, which was sharp as glass. He wanted her because she was real, in a world where he had forgotten how to be. Because every sentence she spoke was something he didn't know he needed to hear. Because she made him doubt the version of himself that could destroy this place and walk away without scars. Meanwhile, Clara stood alone in the wine cellar. She had lit a single candle and opened one of her father's unlabeled bottles, an act she saved for nights when she felt the future trembling. She took a slow sip, closed her eyes, and leaned against the cool stone. Something was changing. Inside the walls. Inside her. And if she wasn't careful, Daniel Shore, Dominic Stone, she whispered to herself, unknowingly, might change her with it. Chapter 3. When the Earth Breaks. The rain did not let up. By morning, the hotel felt like it had slipped into a different world, one untethered from time, bordered only by mist and mud. The storm had severed phone lines, cut power to the generator, and left only faint cell reception in one stubborn corner of the conservatory. The roads remained impassable. There were 4 guests still at the Moreau. 2 couples from San Francisco, who alternated between board games and anxious pacing. Clara had calmed them the night before with wine and firelight, but she knew their patience had a clock on it. She hadn't seen Dominic since late the previous night. Part of her hoped he had taken the opportunity to vanish, to walk away from whatever unspoken thing now stretched between them. But as she passed through the lounge on her way to the kitchen, there he was, sleeping on the leather settee by the fire, one arm over his head, the other resting lightly on his chest, his shirt sleeves still rolled. The glow of the embers played gently over his face, softer in sleep, younger. A shadow of the man he must have been before whatever had hardened him. Clara stood there a moment too long, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the way his brows furrowed even in rest. He dreamed like someone trying not to drown. She left quietly, but the image of him stayed, lodged behind her ribs. In the kitchen, she found Sam, her sous chef, stacking trays of preserved lemons beside a flickering candle. The air smelled of rosemary, yeast, and damp cotton. "Storm says we're in for another 2 days," Sam said without looking up. "Landslide collapsed the West Ridge. Nothing's coming in or out." Clara nodded, already knowing. "We ration what we need. Keep the guests distracted." Sam grunted. "You want a distraction? That writer of yours is easy on the eyes." She shot him a look. "He's not mine." Sam smirked, slicing into a blood orange. "Didn't say he was." Later that afternoon, the hotel roof began to leak. Clara climbed into the attic herself, refusing to call Dominic or one of the other guests. She wrestled a tarp over the cracked tiles while thunder growled low over the vineyard hills. The rain was cold, spitting sideways through a broken window pane, soaking her hair and shirt in minutes. She didn't hear the footsteps until he spoke. "Are you trying to drown up here?" She turned sharply. Dominic was at the attic door, boots muddy, shirt clinging to his chest from the wind outside. There was a defiant concern in his expression, like he was angry that she hadn't asked for help. "I'm managing," she said tightly, her breath fogging in the chill. "You shouldn't be up here." "Neither should you." He moved closer, careful on the beams. "You're going to catch pneumonia, patching something that should have been fixed years ago." Clara yanked the tarp tighter. "Not all of us have the luxury of rebuilding things from scratch." He stilled. Her words had landed too close to something real. "I didn't mean." "No," he said softly. "You did. And you're right." She blinked at him. The wind paused. The silence between them felt sharper than the storm. "Here," he said, crossing the final space and helping her anchor the last corner. His hands were steady, movements precise, but his voice was low. "You're strong, Clara. I see it in everything you touch. But even the strongest people need relief." Clara swallowed hard. The word relief echoed through her like a bell toll. No one had said that to her in years. No one had seen her, really seen her since her father died. She turned her face slightly away. "I don't know what you're doing to me," she whispered. Dominic's hand lingered near hers. "I could say the same." The tension crackled between them like static before lightning. But Clara stepped back, her eyes a warning. "This place is fragile," she said. "If you touch something, be sure you're ready for what it costs." Dominic looked at her as if he were memorizing every syllable. "I'm starting to understand that." They descended the attic stairs slowly, both soaked, both silent. The storm outside had begun to crescendo, rattling the panes, groaning through the bones of the old building. As they reached the second-floor landing, the lights flickered again and failed for the final time. The hallway went black. Clara fumbled for her lantern. Dominic reached out on instinct, one hand at the small of her back, steadying her. She didn't pull away. He didn't move his hand. "I know where the candles are," she whispered, throat tight. But neither of them moved for a long moment. An hour later, the hotel glowed from dozens of flickering points of light. Clara had placed candles in every room, even in the back hallways. It felt like a vigil, or a memory she hadn't lived yet. She found Dominic in the conservatory, staring out at the rain-swollen hills, the vineyards ghost-like behind the mist. He had built a fire in the corner hearth and was sipping something amber from a tumbler. "I didn't know this room could feel so holy," he said as she entered. Clara looked around. The candlelight bounced across the glass ceiling, the ivy-coated walls, the rain-skinned windows. "It's never been this quiet," she said, "even when it's empty." Dominic glanced at her. "Storms do that. They pull the noise out of us." She stepped toward him. "Not close, but not far." "Did something happen to you?" she asked gently, "to make you stop trusting quiet things?" He looked down at his glass. "Yes," he said, and that was all. But it was enough. In the flickering firelight of the conservatory, Dominic Stone, for the first time in years, let himself feel trapped not by circumstance, but by want. And Clara Moreau, for the first time in years, wondered if the person she feared losing to wasn't an investor or a stranger, but herself. The wind screamed through the valley that night. It rushed like a wild animal down the vineyard slopes, clawing at the windows, shaking the Moreau's shutters with primal rage. Trees bent as if bowing to something merciless, and the vines, so elegant by sunlight, now looked like the desperate arms of the earth itself, reaching for something just out of grasp. Inside the conservatory, Clara and Dominic sat in quiet silhouette. Neither moved for some time. Then Clara spoke, her voice gentle but unsparing. "You speak in fragments, Dominic. Half-truths. Shadows. Why?" He met her gaze slowly. In the flickering light, his eyes looked almost silver. "Because full truths don't come without consequences," he said. "And I've learned to weigh cost before confession." She tilted her head. "That sounds like someone who regrets being honest. That sounds like someone who's made honesty into currency." Clara considered this. She didn't flinch. "Then maybe I'm the fool who still trades in faith." Dominic smiled just faintly, but it wasn't mocking. It was reverent. "You're not a fool, Clara. You're the last real thing I've seen in a long time." She turned away then, heart twisting dangerously in her chest. Dominic stepped closer, slowly, as though not to scare the moment away. "Tell me," he asked softly, "what made you stay after your father died? You could have taken a different life." Clara didn't answer right away. Outside, the storm struck like punctuation lightning cracking across the hills, thunder answering deep and slow. Finally, she said, "Because every brick in this place knows my name. Because when he died, I realized he had built this not for profit, but for me, for memory, for beauty. I couldn't walk away from that." Dominic exhaled, something collapsing inside him. "He gave you a world," he said. Clara's lips curled, bittersweet. "And I've spent every day trying to keep it breathing." A silence passed between them, heavy as velvet. Then, without a word, she walked to the grand piano in the far corner of the conservatory. She opened the lid slowly. The keys were ivory, real ivory, yellowed at the edges and smelled faintly of rosewood and thyme. She sat, her fingers resting on the keys like an offering. And then she played. A slow, aching melody poured into the space. Minor chords twisted into hopeful ones. Melancholy spun like silk around warmth. It wasn't practiced, it was remembered. Something her father had taught her. Long ago. Something her hands still knew how to feel, even when her mind forgot. Dominic didn't move. He watched her, not just her body, bent slightly over the piano, or her hands, dancing through grief and grace, but the way she seemed to become the sound, the way she surrendered. It undid him. And when she finished, the silence that followed was the kind that lived in cathedrals. "I didn't know you could do that," he said hoarsely. Clara looked at him, expression unreadably. "You don't know what I can do." Something in her words pulled him forward. He crossed the room slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. She didn't step back. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, when he stood inches from her. "And I will." But she didn't. Instead, her fingers reached for his shirt collar, slow, hesitant, then sure. She didn't pull him close, but she didn't let go. The air between them grew heavy with the storm, with breath, with the dangerous thrill of maybe His hand came up, gently tracing the edge of her jaw, brushing a strand of damp hair from her temple. The touch was barely there, like asking permission in a language no one had taught him. Their faces were so close now she could feel his breath on her lips, warm and slow. But then, something shifted in her. Clara stepped back, not abruptly, but with intention. "I can't," she said softly, her voice cracking like a branch. "Not when I don't know what this is. Or who you are." Dominic froze. His hands fell away. She was right. She didn't know. Not really. And if he kissed her now, he would be kissing her as a lie. The truth in that stung more than her rejection. "Then I'll tell you," he said. "Soon." She nodded once. A barrier had returned, not out of coldness but fear. The kind that came from being close to something real, and knowing it could vanish. Clara walked away from the piano, away from him, her silhouette trailing behind the candlelight. Dominic remained. He sat down on the bench where she had been, her warmth still clinging to the keys. And for the first time since childhood, he touched the piano softly, a single note. It rang out through the storm. A promise, or maybe an apology. Upstairs, in her room, Clara sat at her writing desk with trembling hands. She opened the drawer where she kept her father's old ledgers, pulled out the maintenance notebook, but couldn't focus. All she saw was Dominic's face so close, so rough, and something behind it. Not decide, not quite, but distance, like a man holding back a flood. Outside, the earth shifted again. Another landslide, deeper in the ridge. A sound like thunder and bones. But inside the Moreau, something else cracked first. A heart that hadn't been touched in years. Chapter 4. The Man Behind the Mask. The storm began to recede by dawn. Rain still whispered against the windows, but the wind had quieted, and the fog had lifted just enough to reveal the hills bruised but standing. Vines clung stubbornly to the sodden earth, and the olive trees swayed like dancers finding their rhythm again. Dominic awoke not in his bed, but in the conservatory, stretched awkwardly on the velvet chaise, blanketless and unrested. He rubbed the back of his neck and stared at the pale gray light filtering through the glass ceiling. The place smelled faintly of smoke and wet lavender. She didn't kiss me, but she almost had. That single fact echoed louder than any rejection. She had looked at him like she wanted to fall, but not without knowing what waited at the bottom. And he couldn't give her that. Not yet. In the dining room, Clara poured coffee into delicate porcelain mugs that had once belonged to her grandmother. The staff moved like tired shadows around her, preparing a minimal breakfast for the few remaining guests. Her movements were practiced, but her mind wandered. Every time she tried to focus on the toast, the coffee grounds, the leaking pipe beneath the sink, her thoughts drifted back to the moment in the conservatory. The closeness, the near kiss. Why did you stop? Why didn't I? She took the tray and walked toward the lounge. Dominic was there, half-buttoned shirt, hair mussed, holding a book he clearly wasn't reading. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Clara placed the tray on the table between them. Black, no sugar. I guessed. Dominic gave a tired smile. You guessed right. I usually do. He took the mug but didn't drink. His fingers curled around the warmth like it was something he didn't deserve. I should thank you, he said quietly, for not letting me ruin something last night. Clara sat across from him, her legs crossed beneath her linen trousers. You didn't ruin anything. You were. Honest. Dominic's jaw tensed. Not entirely. Clara tilted her head. No one ever is, in the beginning. There it was again, her uncanny ability to see past defenses, not to wound, but to witness. He set the mug down. I wasn't always like this. Closed off? Cold, he corrected. She looked at him, her voice barely audible. Then tell me who you were. He didn't speak right away. But then, slowly, he began, I grew up in New York. My father was a commercial developer, brilliant, brutal. My mother was a ghost in her own house. Art historian. Deed young. I used to draw, paint, obsess over architecture like it was scripture. I wanted to build cathedrals. Spaces that meant something. Clara listened, her face unreadably. But when she died, Dominic continued, something in me shut. I stopped drawing. I started shadowing my father's work. I told myself it was strength, that dreams were for people who could afford to lose. Clara's voice came soft. And did you ever build something that felt like a cathedral? He looked at her then. No. Her throat tightened. He didn't have to say the rest. Not yet. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees. You still draw? Sometimes. On planes. Napkins. Corners of contracts I don't believe in. Clara reached for her notebook, the one she used for renovation sketches. She tore a blank page from the back and handed it to him. Then draw now. He blinked. Here? Why not? Dominic stared at the blank page. He hadn't held a pencil with intention in years. Not like this. But her gaze didn't waver. And something in him, something old, something aching, rose like a tide. He took the pencil, and he began to draw. 15 minutes passed without a word. Clara watched as the sketch unfolded. Not a hotel, not a tower, but a small garden pavilion. Vines trailing along wooden beams. A single hanging lantern. A round table set for two. The perspective was precise but emotional, like a memory that hadn't happened yet. When he finished, he looked up. It's beautiful, Clara said, surprised by the lump in her throat. He smiled, almost shy. It's yours. If you want it. She tucked the page into her sketchbook without a word. The rest of the day moved slowly. They worked side by side to patch more leaks, restack firewood, and clear branches from the southern stairway. They rarely spoke, yet something unspoken bloomed in the silences. A trust. A rhythm. Later, as dusk approached, Clara found Dominic on the veranda, watching the sky burn tangerine over the hills. She stood beside him. This is the only part of the day that ever feels long, she said. He glanced at her. Because it's beautiful? Because it always ends. Dominic looked at her. Really looked. Not everything has to. She felt the ache in her chest again, the one he kept pulling out of her with no effort at all. She didn't answer. But she didn't leave. They stood together, shoulder to shoulder, as the last light sank behind the vineyard. And for the first time since his arrival, Dominic thought, maybe I don't want this to end either. Night fell slowly over the Moreau. Without electricity, the hotel was lit like a half-remembered dream candles in sconces, oil lamps along the stairs, a fire crackling low in the reading room. Shadows danced along the walls like ghosts from some gentler century. Clara moved through it all like a woman woven from the building itself, quietly alert, sleeves rolled, curls loosened by the heat. She checked on guests, stirred stew in the kitchen, and adjusted the generator's manual backup, all while carrying the weight of the storm and something deeper, the gravity of connection. She didn't see Dominic again until later, when the hotel had gone mostly quiet. He was sitting on the floor of the mural lounge, his back against the far wall, long legs stretched out in front of him. In the flickering firelight, he looked almost undone, tie abandoned, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sketchbook resting on one knee. Clara stepped in, silently. The mural glowed above him, her father's stormy vineyard, eternal and watching. You've been hiding, she said gently. Dominic looked up. Just thinking. Dangereux pastime. He smiled. You sound like someone who's tried it. More than I care to admit. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat from the hearth and the strange, magnetic pull of his shoulder beside hers. What are you thinking about? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he passed her the sketchbook. Clara opened it to find page after page of fragmented drawings, buildings, arches, hands, lanterns, and then a charcoal rendering of her. She blinked. You sketched me? Dominic didn't look at her. I couldn't help it. It wasn't romanticized, no softened features, no polished lines. It was honest. Hair a little wild, eyes focused, mouth slightly open like she'd just spoken something difficult. The expression was hers exactly. Clara felt her chest tighten. It's beautiful. It's you, he said simply. Silence bloomed between them, this time softer, more fragile. Clara reached out, tracing the edge of the paper. No one's ever drawn me before. Not like this. I used to draw people to understand them, Dominic said. I don't know if I ever could. But with you, his voice broke. It doesn't feel like projection. It feels like remembering. Clara looked at him, heart thudding with something she couldn't name. You're not who you pretend to be, she said. He met her eyes. No, I'm not. Then who are you really, Dominic? He inhaled slowly. Her voice had said Dominic, not Daniel. He didn't correct her. She didn't apologize. But he didn't answer either. Instead, he reached for the lantern and lowered its flame until the room dimmed to gold and hush. He turned toward her, closer now, close enough to smell the warmth of her skin, lavender, rosemary, and ink. You're right to question me, he said, his voice low, raspy. I came here for reasons that had nothing to do with rest or retreat. I wasn't supposed to feel anything. Clara watched him, waiting. But I did, he murmured. I do. He lifted a hand, hesitant, reverent, and brushed a stray curl from her cheek. She didn't pull away. Her breath hitched, eyes soft and wide. You scare me, she whispered. Dominic's thumb lingered just beneath her jaw. Because you want this too? Because I do, she breathed. And then, slowly, so slowly, it felt like memory before motion, he leaned in. Their lips met like a question. Soft, searching, suspended in the silence between thunder and light. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't rough. It was careful. The kind of kiss that knew there were bruises beneath the skin. It touched. Clara's fingers slid up his chest, anchoring at the collarbone. Dominic's hand cupped the back of her neck, grounding himself as if afraid he might vanish. When they finally pulled apart, both of them stayed close, foreheads resting together. I should hate you, Clara said softly. Dominic nodded against her skin. You still might. Her laughter was a breath, a shiver. And yet, here we are. She closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of his breath. This can't be real. Dominic's voice came like a confession. It's the most real thing I've felt in years. Later, in her room, Clara sat in bed staring at the drawing he'd given her. She had tucked it into the leather-bound renovation journal her father had gifted her at 19. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't know who he truly was. But she knew this. The man who kissed her tonight was not the same man who had walked through the lobby days ago. And she wasn't the same woman either. Something was shifting. Not just in them, but in the hotel. The air felt different, like the building itself was holding its breath. Waiting. Dominic couldn't sleep. Not for guilt. That would come later. But for the way her eyes haunted him, clear, unguarded, and full of trust he had not yet earned. He had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed, and the closer he got to her, the more the lie between them began to burn. Chapter 5. The Knife of Truth. The sun returned with no ceremony. By morning, the sky stretched clean and blue above the vineyard, as if the storm had never existed. Dew glistened on every leaf, and the air smelled of turned earth and electric renewal. But inside the Moreau Hotel, everything had changed. Dominic sat alone in the breakfast room, sipping burnt coffee from a chipped mug. His suit jacket hung over the chair beside him, but the rest of him looked freshly pressed, too clean for a man who hadn't slept. Because sleep hadn't come. All night he'd lain awake. The taste of Clara still on his lips, the weight of his silence pressing hard on his chest. He had promised himself he would tell her, that he would say the words and face what followed, but he hadn't. Instead, he had kissed her, like a coward, like a thief. He looked up when he heard footsteps. Clara entered, hair half damp from a rushed morning shower, her button-up blouse wrinkled from sleep, her eyes open, unguarded. She smiled when she saw him, and that smile killed him. Morning, she said softly. He tried to return it. You survived the storm. Barely. She grabbed a piece of toast and sat across from him. And you? I heard you up. I couldn't sleep. Clara chewed slowly, watching him. You're leaving today, aren't you? His stomach turned. If the road's clear. There was a pause. Will you come back? She asked. That should have been the moment. The confession. But instead, Dominic reached across the table and touched her hand. I want to—" And that lie, though small, was the sharpest of all. The article dropped just after noon. Clara was in the garden, speaking with the groundskeeper, when her assistant Lena rushed out from the front desk, phone in hand. "You need to see this," Lena said, breathless. Clara frowned. "What is it?" "It's on BizNapa. The top story." She took the phone. Her eyes scanned the headline once. "Stone Partners set to demolish historic Moreau property plans confirmed for casino resort." For a moment, she didn't breathe. The world around her blurred the garden. Lena, the voices of birds, and all she could hear was a low static roar in her head. She clicked into the article. And there, embedded 3 paragraphs down, was a quote from Marcus Lang, Chief Financial Officer of Stone Partners, Dominic Stone's company. Dominic Stone. She stood completely still, the words carving themselves into her chest with ruthless precision. Her fingers clenched the phone. Lena said something. Clara didn't hear. Without a word, she turned and walked, marched back into the hotel. Dominic heard the door open behind him before he heard her footsteps. But he knew. He knew the second he looked up that it had happened. Clara stood there, the phone in her hand, her expression unreadable at first, too calm, too quiet. Then she said his name. The real one. Dominic. The sound of it from her lips shattered something inside him. He stood slowly. "Clara. Don't." Her voice was soft, almost gentle. That was worse. He took a step forward. "Let me explain." She held up the phone. "Did you write this?" "No." "Marcus, did you approve this?" "No," he said again. "I swear to you, I didn't. I didn't know he was leaking anything to the press." Clara's eyes narrowed, her voice shaking. "But it's true, isn't it? Your company owns the rights to purchase this land. You were going to demolish it. You came here to scout it, to decide how to erase my life and replace it with a casino." Dominic's mouth opened, closed. "Clara." "Yes. That's what I was sent here to do." The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Clara just stared at him. And then, slowly, she laughed. It was soft, hollow. The kind of laugh that came from realizing your nightmares had a name. "I let you in," she whispered. "I showed you everything. My father's studio. My piano. I kissed you." He stepped closer. "I didn't plan that. I didn't plan any of this." "No," she said bitterly. "But you planned to lie." Dominic flinched. "I wanted to tell you. I was going to." "When? After the ink dried? After the wrecking ball?" He had no answer. Clara shook her head, eyes glittering now. "Do you know how many people have tried to take this place from me? Banks? Developers? Bureaucrats with their clipboards and their pity." Her voice rose. "But you pretended to be someone else. You waited for me to trust you." "I didn't wait," he said quietly. "It just happened. And I hated myself for it the whole time." She stared at him. "Then leave. Before I hate you too." He stepped back like she'd struck him. Clara turned without another word. And Dominic Stone stood alone in a room filled with everything he had just destroyed. Upstairs, Clara tore the sketch from her notebook. The drawing of the garden pavilion, so full of hope, ripped clean down the middle. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled, because she had once believed the worst kind of betrayal was being left behind. Now she knew better. It was being seen completely, intimately, and still used. The drive back to San Francisco was silent except for the wipers dragging across the windshield. Dominic gripped the steering wheel like it might anchor him to something real. But his mind, his whole body, was still at the Moreau. Still in the mural room, still hearing Clara's voice break over the words, "You waited for me to trust you." The hills blurred past. She hadn't yelled. That was what gutted him most. She had looked at him like a woman watching a flood swallow a house. No rage, just unbearable loss. He had built walls for years to avoid that exact expression, and now he'd become the cause of it. Marcus Lang's office sat at the top floor of a glass tower that overlooked the financial district. Clean lines. Cold steel. Everything Dominic had once thought power should look like. Now, it made him nauseous. He didn't knock. Just walked in. Marcus was on a call. He raised a finger in a wait gesture without looking up. Dominic slammed the door shut behind him. Marcus sighed and muted his headset. I assume you've read the coverage. Solid PR. Clean forward momentum. You leaked the plan, Dominic said, voice flat. Marcus shrugged. You were dragging your feet. I pushed the boulder down the hill. I told you I wasn't ready. No, Marcus said, standing. You told me you were getting distracted by some charming woman who runs a ghost of a hotel with a smile and a piano. I did my job, Dominic. I made the decision you wouldn't. That wasn't your call to make. Marcus stepped closer, voice cool. It was exactly my call to make when the board started sniffing around about delays. You're playing heartbroken Romeo while I'm protecting your empire. Dominic's hands curled into fists. At what cost? Marcus scoffed. Oh, don't get righteous now. You went there to close a deal, and you fell into a bed. Classic mistake. We've all done it. I didn't sleep with her, Dominic said sharply. Marcus blinked. Who? Well, good for you. Doesn't change the fact that she knows who you are now, and the press release is already out. Either we move forward, or we walk away with nothing but a PR mess. Dominic looked out the window. Fog drifted between the skyscrapers like ghosts. Maybe we do walk. Marcus went still. Excuse me? Dominic turned to him. Maybe we pull the offer. Step back. Reassess. Marcus laughed, sharp and humorless. You're serious. You're actually going to throw out 6 months of negotiation over one woman? I'm not throwing it out, Dominic said. I'm choosing not to ruin her life. Her life? Marcus sneered. She runs a hotel, running on borrowed time and romantic delusions. You offered her an out. Dominic's voice was low, dangerous. You don't know her. No, Marcus said. But I know you. And you're not this man, Dominic. You built your name by being the guy who doesn't flinch. Dominic took a breath. Maybe I'm tired of being that guy. Marcus's smile vanished. The tension turned sharp. It was no longer friend to friend, it was wolf to wolf. You walk away from this, Marcus said. And you risk everything we've built. Dominic nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time to build something else. He left the office without another word. Outside, the sky was darkening again, a second storm gathering over the bay. At the Moreau, Clara stood in the wine cellar, her back pressed to the cool stone wall. She had sent the guests home that morning. Only Lena and the groundskeeper remained. Everything felt dimmer, every color grayer. She had tried to convince herself that it didn't matter that Dominic had just been another vulture in a better suit. But it wasn't true. That kiss, his hands, the sketch, his silences, even they had meant something. And that was what made it unbearable. He had felt like hers, and now she realized he'd never been hers at all. She poured a glass from the bottle her father had sealed the year. Clara turned 21. She drank it in one breath. That evening, her phone buzzed. A wire transfer notification. She frowned, brows knitting. En anonymous deposit. $8 million. Exactly the amount she owed on the Moreau's remaining debt, renovations, and licensing obligations. No not. No explanation. Just salvation. Her heart thudded. She stared at the screen, breath shaking. And she knew. It was him. Back in his high-rise apartment, Dominic watched the city lights pulse like heartbeats through glass. He had sent the wire, not as penance, not even as redemption, but as truth. A gesture stripped of expectation, strategy, or reward. He didn't know if she would forgive him. He didn't even know if she'd speak to him again. But he had finally chosen her. And for the first time in years, he felt like a man again. Not a mask. Chapter 6. Ruin and Rainfall. The storm had passed, but the Moreau was still bleeding. A burst pipe in the east wing had flooded the linen storage overnight. Water seeped through the floorboards, curling wood and soaking antique carpets with quiet cruelty. 2 rooms were unusable. One of the boilers had failed. Mold crept like a whisper behind the baseboards. The hotel wasn't just fragile, it was beginning to fall apart in her hands. And Clara couldn't bring herself to care. She stood barefoot in the ruined hall, sleeves rolled, hair unbrushed, watching water drip through the ceiling like slow confession. Her phone buzzed. Another voicemail from a supplier threatening to pull out. A follow-up from the city inspector, delayed by the storm. A text from Lena, who had finally gone home for the weekend, promising to return Monday, but Clara didn't move. Didn't answer. Instead, her gaze drifted back to the bank notification she'd stared at for 2 nights now. 8 million USD. No name. No message. No conditions. And yet she knew, the same way you know the moment your skin breaks under glass before the blood comes. It was him, Dominic Stone. She hated that she hadn't rejected it immediately. She hated that a part of her tired, desperate human had exhaled when she saw the number. You don't get to save me, she'd thought. And yet, she hadn't returned it either. She had only stared, because what if this wasn't a bribe? What if it was an apology? What if it was the first honest thing he had ever given her? Later that morning, Clara sat at the lobby desk with the hotel's renovation ledger spread out before her. Her hands moved mechanically, scanning, subtracting, adding, adjusting, but her mind pulsed elsewhere. Every repair had a memory. Every corner of this place was wrapped in her father's voice, her mother's laughter, the music of a childhood that had felt, for a while, like magic. But magic didn't fix burst pipes. And nostalgia didn't pay invoices. She reached for the coffee mug beside her, only to find it empty. With a sigh, she pushed back from the desk and moved toward the kitchen, bare feet padding softly on the cold tile. The Moreau felt different now, as if it were watching her. Not judging, but waiting. In the garden, the vines had started to recover. Bright green shoots clung to the trellises, trembling but persistent. The wind was softer now. The sky a pale, indifferent blue. Clara wandered among the rosemary bushes and cypress trees, her sandals crunching on gravel. This had always been the part of the hotel she retreated to when she couldn't breathe. It grounded her, reminded her what mattered. But even now, the air felt heavy with questions. Can you forgive him? Can you live with the truth of what he did and what he tried to undo? She didn't know. She didn't know anything anymore. She found the answer where she least expected it. Tucked into the ledger. Not the payment confirmation. That had already been burned into her memory. But a second note, anonymous, but in his handwriting, folded between 2 pages. It hadn't been there before. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Clara, I was sent here to destroy something I didn't understand. And in the process, I found the only place that ever made me feel real. You don't owe me forgiveness. I don't expect it. I only ask that you use the money to protect the thing your father built. The thing you've protected alone for far too long. Let this place live whether I get to be part of it or not. D. Clara read it twice. Then again. She sat still for a long time after that, the paper pressed to her chest, her breath shallow. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't self-pity. It was surrender. That night, thunder returned not from the sky, but from the plumbing. The burst pipe in the basement gave way completely, flooding the storage room and sending hot water through the north corridor. Clara scrambled to shut the valves, but by the time she arrived, the damage was done. The floor sagged beneath her weight. Plaster peeled from the ceiling. She collapsed onto the stairs, soaked and exhausted. The hotel, her legacy, her entire inheritance was crumbling in her hands. And yet, through the chaos, one terrible truth pulsed louder than anything. He had given her the means to save it, not for himself, not for leverage, but because, in some impossible way, he still believed in her. She hated him for it. She missed him for it. And she wanted him to see what she would build from the ruins. By morning, Clara's hands were blistered. She had worked through the night, sleeves soaked and eyes burning. She had pried warped boards from the basement floor, stacked waterlogged linens into trash bins, hauled rusted pipes out by their angry seams. Her muscles screamed with every motion. But she didn't stop, because fury had always been her fuel. Fury at being underestimated. Fury at being alone. And now, a quieter fury aimed at the man who had lit something in her only to vanish in silence and ruin. But beneath it all, another truth settled like sediment at the bottom of a stormed lake. He had given her back her fight, not as a savior, but as a spark, At noon, she stood on the front porch of the Moreau and dialed her bank. "Yes," she said, voice clear. "I'd like to accept the wire transfer. And no, I don't want the sender's identity confirmed. If he wanted to be anonymous, let him stay that way." She hung up before the manager could say anything else. The repairs began within 24 hours. She called in everyone she trusted, old contractors, out-of-work friends, neighbors who had once danced in the Moreau ballroom as teenagers. They arrived with tool belts and thermoses and quiet reverence. By the third day, the leak was sealed. The electrical was rewired. The mold was cut out like a sickness from the hotel's bones. And Clara moved through it all like a conductor. Commanding, focused, tireless. She did not mention Dominic. Not once. But sometimes, when the rooms grew quiet, she would find herself staring at the empty sketchbook on her desk, or the bench in the conservatory where he had drawn her, where he had touched her like she was something he thought he might lose. He already did, she'd tell herself. But it never felt that simple. On the fourth day, the insurance agent arrived for a damage inspection. "You're lucky," the woman said, clipboard in hand. "Could have lost the whole east wing. Storms like that don't usually give second chances." Clara gave a tight smile. "We'll take what we can get." The woman paused. "It's rare. You know what you're doing here. Most owners just take the payout and walk. Turn the keys over to some corporate shell." Clara didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, she said, "This place isn't just mine. It belongs to history. To every couple who honeymooned in room 5. To every grandmother who danced here barefoot on her birthday." The woman studied her. "Well, whoever helped you keep it standing, thank them. You don't see this kind of resurrection anymore." After she left, Clara stood in the foyer for a long time, the words echoing in her head. Resurrection. That night, she opened her father's old cigar box, the one he'd kept hidden under the floorboard in his office. Inside was a stack of Polaroids from the early days of the hotel. Mismatched chairs, paint-chipped doors, guests laughing around long tables. In every photo, something was imperfect, but everything was alive. She ran her fingers over one photo. Her father in his apron, grinning beside a woman with dark curls and laughter in her eyes. Her mother. Clara closed her eyes, letting the memory bloom, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Dominic didn't know. He didn't know about the repairs, or the acceptance of the money, or the fact that Clara had reclaimed every inch of the Moreau, not with his help, but with his belief. What he did know was this: Marcus was circling, and he wasn't circling quietly. "Did you really think walking away would end it?" Marcus said, leaning against the polished edge of the boardroom table. Dominic didn't respond. "I own a third of the stone portfolio," Marcus continued. "You may have your principles now, but I still have leverage. I could go around you. Approach the city. Push zoning revisions." Dominic's voice was cold. "You'd gut the company for one acquisition?" Marcus shrugged. "It's not about the acquisition anymore. It's about you. You made me look weak in front of the board. You chose her." "I chose what's right," Dominic said. Marcus smirked. "And now you'll learn how lonely that feels." But Dominic didn't flinch, because loneliness was no longer the threat. Losing her had already shown him what real emptiness felt like. He left the meeting without another word. Back in Napa, Clara stood in the garden at dusk, eyes on the pergola where Dominic had once described the sketch, the lantern, the table set for two, the vines curling like breath. She had plans drawn up now. To build it, not as a shrine to him, but as proof that some beauty is born from broken things. The wind moved gently through the olive branches above. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, not for saving her, but for helping her remember she could save herself." Chapter 7. The War Within. The boardroom was cold with ambition. 30 floors above San Francisco, the sky outside glared silver, casting sharp light across the chrome table, the tailored suits, and the faces that had been trained to calculate risk in real time. No one here blinked without purpose. Dominic Stone sat at the head of the table, still, poised, unreadable. But inside, everything boiled. He could feel Marcus watching him from across the glassy divide, fingers steepled like a man expecting to be applauded. The quarterly shareholders' meeting had been called under the guise of financial alignment, but Dominic knew the truth. This was a challenge, and Marcus had drawn the line. "Thank you all for joining," Marcus said smoothly, standing. "I'll begin with the regional asset forecast and move into our opportunity acquisition in Napa Valley. The Moreau property, as many of you have seen, is currently undergoing restoration. However, the parcel sits on rezoned land. If the current ownership should choose to sell—" "They won't," Dominic cut in. Heads turned. "Murmurs." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me?" Dominic rose to his feet, slow and deliberate. "There is no acquisition. Not from us. Not from anyone representing Stone Partners. We're pulling out of the deal. Effective immediately." The room stilled. A few advisors exchanged confused glances. One of the junior board members, young, sharp, unbloodied, spoke up. "Forgive me, Mr. Stone, but why abandon an asset already under conditional approval?" Dominic's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because it was never an asset. It's someone's legacy. A legacy I violated. Marcus laughed, too loudly. "We're not in the business of sentiment. Maybe that's been the problem." Marcus stepped forward, voice harder now. "You signed the initial letter of intent, Dominic. You committed our capital. You approved the architectural scoping yourself. And I'm uncommitting it." Dominic said flatly, "I'll cover every sunk cost personally. Pull my compensation package. Sell my shares if you have to." Another wave of murmurs. "You're throwing your empire away over one hotel?" Marcus hissed. "Over a woman you barely know?" "No." Dominic's voice darkened. "I'm protecting the man I forgot how to be." Outside the boardroom, silence echoed in his ears. Dominic leaned against the wall of the elevator as it descended, the city slowly rising around him through the glass. His hands trembled, adrenaline and grief rippling beneath his skin. He had done it. He had killed the deal. And maybe killed his career. But it felt right. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his name begin to lift, like armor falling away after too many wars. That night, he returned to his penthouse and opened the drawer he never touched. Inside was the first sketch he ever made. Crumpled. Yellowed. A cathedral drawn in pencil and wonder, scrawled at age 14 on the back of a real estate contract. He'd been so certain. Once, he lifted it from the drawer and pressed it flat on the table, tracing the outline with a fingertip. Then he picked up his phone. He didn't call Clara. Not yet. Instead, he called his legal counsel. "Prepare the transfer," he said. "Liquidate my portfolio, everything tied to Stone Partners. I want out." A pause. "All of it?" Dominic nodded into the silence. "All of it." 3 days later, the business press exploded. Dominic Stoneseaver's ties with Stone Partners' portfolio, liquidated in private buyout. From tycoon to ghost. Is Dominic Stone leaving Wall Street for good? Mystery behind the Moreau. Collapse sources suggest. Romantic entanglement sparked corporate schism. Dominic ignored them all. He turned off his phone, shut down his company inbox, and walked out of the tower that had once defined him. And he kept walking. Far away, in the quiet of Napa, Clara sat on the rebuilt bench under the pergola, morning sun sifting through the vines above her. The garden was alive again, humming with bees, smelling of jasmine and promise. She hadn't heard from Dominic since the letter. But the money had rebuilt the bones of the hotel, and she'd rebuilt herself. Stronger. Softer, too. No longer waiting. No longer wounded. Just. Open. And then, as if pulled by gravity she didn't believe in, she looked up toward the hill where the road curved down into the valley, and saw a black car. Small. Unassuming. But her heart stopped anyway. The car door opened slowly. Dominic stepped out, not in a suit, but in dark jeans and a worn button-down rolled at the sleeves. No tie. No armor. He looked taller somehow, not in stature but in gravity. As if shedding his empire had allowed him to stand in his own truth for the first time, he stood by the open gate, waiting. Clara remained on the bench beneath the pergola, unmoving, the spring wind lifting strands of her hair across her cheek. For one long moment, neither spoke. Birdsong filled the garden. Olive branches whispered. And then, Clara rose. She walked to him, steady as a heartbeat. She stopped 2 feet away, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way they searched hers for shelter or sentence. "You came back," she said, voice unreadable. "I didn't think I would," he answered softly. "Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think I deserved to." Her arms crossed slowly. "And what changed?" Dominic looked past her for a moment, at the hotel rising behind her like a memory made whole again. "I walked away," he said. "From everything. The firm. The board. The money. Marcus." Her brow furrowed, just slightly. "You walked away from your company?" "I liquidated my position. Burned the bridge before they could rebuild it behind me." Clara blinked. "Why?" Dominic swallowed. "Because I couldn't ask for forgiveness while still holding a knife behind my back." A silence spread between them, heavy but not cold. "I never wanted to be a man who took," he continued. "But I was, for a long time, and then I met you. And suddenly, the cost of that way of living wasn't numbers anymore. It was your voice, your trust, your face when you looked at me like I wasn't a stranger." Clara looked away. "You lied to me." "I did," he said. "And I regret it every time I close my eyes." He took one step forward. Just one. "I didn't come here to fix anything, or expect anything. I came because I needed to stand in front of you as a man who finally understands what he ruined." Clara's throat tightened. Dominic's voice softened, almost breaking. "You made me want to be someone worth loving." Tears burned the edges of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Not yet. You changed the ending," she whispered. "You could have left it as a betrayal. But you didn't." "I don't want to be a chapter in your regret," he said. "And I don't want to be the woman who made you walk away from your life," she replied. "You didn't." He shook his head. "You gave me the courage to leave a version of myself that was already dead." Clara studied him. The man in front of her was not the same man who had walked through the lobby as Daniel Shore. This man stood with nothing but truth. And suddenly, she wasn't angry anymore. Just rough. "Do you know what it felt like?" she asked quietly. "To see your name in that article and realize everything we shared had been a setup?" "Yes," he said. "Because when I saw your eyes after, I felt it too." Her breath caught. "I saw the place in you," he said, "where trust dies. And I never want to be the reason it goes quiet again." Her arms dropped to her sides. And she exhaled. Not in surrender. In release. They sat later beneath the pergola, side by side, their shoulders brushing. Dominic's hands were clasped in his lap, as if still unsure whether he was allowed to reach for anything more. "You should know," Clara said, voice steady. "I used the money. I hoped you would, and I didn't forgive you because of it." He nodded. "I didn't give it to be forgiven." "I know," she said. Then, softer, "That's why I believed you." Dominic turned to her. "What now?" She looked up at the lattice above them, where the first vine blossoms had begun to bloom. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I want it to be built from truth this time." He nodded. "Then let's start with something real." He reached into his pocket and unfolded a napkin creased, worn, and faintly smudged. On it was a sketch. A boutique hotel. Warm brick, Art Deco windows. A central courtyard. Ivy curling over hand-carved balconies. And at its base, a plaque etched into the facade. Moreau, stone. Clara Stared. "I've been drawing this since I left," he said quietly. "I don't want to just build for profit anymore. I want to preserve places like this one. Places with stories." He looked at her. "I want to do it with you. Not just because I love what you built, but because I love you." Silence fell again. But this time, it was not silence of distance. It was silence before bloom. Clara reached for the napkin, folded it slowly, carefully. "I'm not saying yes yet," she said, smiling through the tremble in her voice. Dominic's chest ached with joy. "I wouldn't expect anything less." She looked at him then, not as a stranger, not as a ghost from a wound, but as someone who had come back from fire, holding light instead of ash, Chapter 8. The Collapse. The tremor came at dawn. Subtle at first, just a low shudder through the wooden beams, a soft rattle of glass against the windows. But Clara felt it like a cord vibrating through her spine. She was already awake, seated on the edge of her bed in her robe, studying the week's finances. The page in front of her, marked in red and circled twice, held a number that hadn't changed in months. 84,792. Remaining payroll balance. Due in 3 days. She had calculated every avenue, rerouted costs, bartered with suppliers, extended credit lines until they were paper thin. But the money Dominic had sent, most of it was already gone, poured into the resurrection. Pipes, permits, preservation. The body had been saved. Now the spirit was in jeopardy, because a hotel, Clara knew, wasn't just walls. It was people. By noon, the staff gathered in the dining room. Sunlight slanted across the floor, catching dust motes in the air like suspended time. Clara stood at the head of the table, her hands clasped in front of her, every word burning before she spoke it. "I won't lie to you," she said. "We're in a fragile place. Restoration is nearly complete, but the revenue hasn't caught up. We've had a dozen cancellations this week due to storm-related rumors." Eyes lowered around the room. "I can't promise a miracle," she continued, "but I can promise this. I will not let this place fall, and I won't let you fall with it. You all kept this hotel breathing during its darkest weeks. If we hold a little longer, if we launch this reopening right then, I believe we can turn this." Someone asked gently, "What if we can't?" Clara hesitated. And then Dominic spoke. He had been quiet in the back, leaning against the arched doorway. He stepped forward now, calm but resolute. "Then we build something new from what we saved. Not as owners, not as employees, but as people who chose to protect something that mattered when no one else would." The room fell silent. And then, slowly, one by one, the heads around the table nodded. That night, Clara found herself in her father's old study. She hadn't entered the room since the final letter of foreclosure had arrived 2 years ago. The desk still bore his notches. The walls still carried the ghost of pipe, smoke, and jazz. She lit a candle and sat in his chair, its leather groaning softly beneath her. Dominic stepped in a moment later, watching her from the doorway. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. She didn't look at him. "I do, actually. That's what leadership is." He crossed the room, gently placing a hand on the back of the chair. "No, that's what loneliness pretends leadership is." She closed her eyes. "I'm scared, Dominic." "I know." She turned to him, face bare, stripped of performance. "This hotel was the only place I ever felt safe. And now, I don't know if I'm holding it together or if I'm just the last thing holding it up." He knelt beside her chair, his hand wrapping around hers. "You are the structure," he said. "You always were." The next morning, Clara did what her father used to do when all seemed lost. She threw a party. Well, not quite a party. A soft launch. A post-storm artisan gathering, as the invitations called it. Local wineries, florists, bakers, journalists, artists, anyone who had ever fallen in love in or because of the Moreau. She opened the vineyard grounds, set tables beneath the vines, poured wine from salvaged barrels, and served food made from her grandmother's recipes. She strung lights between olive trees, hung lanterns from the pergola, placed fresh rosemary in the center of every table, bundled with twine and wax-sealed menus. By sunset, music drifted through the garden, laughter spilled onto gravel, and the Moreau felt alive again. Not a hotel, a heartbeat. In the golden hour, Dominic watched Clara from across the pergola. She moved through the crowd like a woman made of both fire and ache, smiling, holding babies, remembering names, thanking volunteers. When she turned toward him, he held up a glass in silent tribute. She didn't smile. Not quite. But she nodded, and the knot in his chest began to loosen. Just after dusk, a man in a tailored blazer approached Clara by the wine table. He handed her a card. She read the name and stiffened slightly. "Martin Hale, Hale Equity Group. We heard about your reopening," he said smoothly. "I represent a boutique investment firm that specializes in family-run properties We'd like to offer partial backing, low interest, high discretion. You'd retain full creative control." Clara's smile was measured. "Thank you," she said. "But we're not for sale." "Not even a piece?" he asked. She held up her glass, voice calm. "Especially not a piece." Then she turned and walked away. Dominic met her at the edge of the garden. "Another suitor?" he asked, amused. She shrugged. "They always come when they smell success." He studied her. "And what do you smell?" She looked at the lights strung across the vineyard, the silhouettes of people dancing beneath the lanterns. "Hope," she said. And when she looked at him, really looked, it was clear. This was not a woman searching for rescue. This was a woman building her own dawn. The morning after the launch, Clara woke before dawn. Outside her window, the vineyard shimmered with dew, the air thick with the hush of spent joy. The night had been a triumph. Music, praise, and dozens of tentative inquiries about bookings. The Moreau had pulsed with life again, wrapped in laughter and flickering lights. But success, real success, was never just applause. It was balance sheets. And hers still didn't balance. She slipped from bed, padded barefoot to her desk, and opened the ledger. The numbers blinked back, unchanged. Sisharar, Wubai. Payroll due. Friday. There had been no miracle overnight. Just grace and a ticking clock. She pressed her palms against her temples and closed her eyes. They had one more week before reopening the rooms fully. The events had brought in deposits, but most of them wouldn't clear for another 2 weeks, which meant she had 3 choices: delay payment and risk losing half her staff, take a predatory bridge loan from Hale or another suitor, fold everything she'd just rebuilt. She picked up her phone to call Lena and stopped. A 4th option whispered from the back of her mind. The one she didn't want to consider: ask Dominic. But she already knew she couldn't. She wouldn't risk turning her reclaimed strength into dependence. Not now. Not again. And not on him. Dominic stood at the edge of the garden that afternoon, hands in his pockets, watching the construction team finish rehanging the original Moreau sign above the arched entry. He didn't say anything when Clara passed him, carrying a box of glassware, just offered to help, which she refused with a nod and a polite smile. They hadn't spoken in more than a day, not out of coldness, but distance. Clara had become a fortress again. Calm, cordial, focused. But Dominic could see the cracks. She wore exhaustion like a fitted coat, elegant but inescapable. He waited until she disappeared inside before turning away and dialing his private banker. "Hi," he said, voice low. "I need to make a transfer." Quietly. That night, Clara sat in the kitchen after everyone had gone home. The chairs were stacked, the lights dim. She clutched a cold mug of chamomile and stared at the payroll folder, unable to open it. Lena entered from the back door, coat already on. "Heading out. But I left the deposit confirmations on your desk." Clara frowned. "What confirmations?" Lena tilted her heel. "Didn't you see the message?" "What message?" $50,000, Lena said. "Wire came through this afternoon. From Moreau Holdings." Clara sat up. "That account doesn't exist." Lena shrugged. "Apparently it does now." Clara bolted to her desk, and there it was, an anonymous wire labeled simply, "Moreau Holdings Trust Allocation, 01. No sender ID. No signature. But she didn't need one. She sank into her chair, the paper trembling in her hands. It wasn't just the money. It was how he gave it. Quietly. Without credit. Without claiming it in a moment of crisis. He had anticipated the shortfall, and he had solved it without stepping into her spotlight. Because he finally understood. Love wasn't giving to be seen. Love was giving without needing to be. She found him the next morning outside room 3. He was inspecting the new lanterns that had just been installed on the upper walk, sleeves rolled, face tired but serene. The same room where he had once slept under a false name, the place their story had begun to fray. "Dominic," she said. He turned, startled. Clara held the printout of the transfer between 2 fingers. "You could have just asked me what I needed." He figured you'd say no. "I would have." He smiled faintly. "But you did it anyway," she said. "I didn't want to be part of the problem again." he said simply, "and I didn't want you to feel like I was trying to own a piece of this." "You're not," she said. "You're helping me protect it." Their eyes locked. "Not performance. No battle. Only truth." "You were never the threat," she said. "The lie was—" He nodded. "I know." She stepped closer, folding the paper in her hands. "I still don't know what this is between us," she admitted. "But I know it matters." Dominic took a breath. "It's whatever you want it to be." Her hand found his, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. "I want it to start from here," she said. "From stillness. From soil. No walls. No shadows." He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, slow and reverent. "Then let's build something that roots." That afternoon, Clara stood before the staff again. Only this time, she was smiling. "I have good news," she said, voice warm. "Payroll will run early this week. Renovations are complete, and reservations are at 80% for next month." A quiet cheer broke out. But what struck Clara wasn't the applause, it was the way they looked at her. Not just as a boss, but as a foundation, and for the first time since her father died, she believed it herself. Chapter 9. The Return. A month later, the Moreau stood radiant under spring sunlight. The vines were thick with new growth, clinging to restored archways like veins of emerald. Honeysuckle bloomed along the pergola, perfuming the walk between the lobby and the vineyard terrace. Music drifted through open windows, piano notes, soft and unhurried. Inside, the scent of fresh paint had faded, replaced with lavender oil and warm cedar. Guests moved through the halls with quiet awe, unaware of how close this place had come to disappearing. Clara walked barefoot across the conservatory floor, clipboard in hand, sunlight slipping across her shoulders. She wore a linen jumpsuit and a hair clip shaped like a laurel leaf, her version of armor. Her eyes scanned the check-in numbers, the catering invoices, the maintenance logs. Every column balanced. For the first time in years, there was no emergency pulling at the edge of her thoughts. No crisis waiting behind the next page. Still, something itched at her ribs. A kind of silence she'd grown used to hearing only when he was missing. Dominic had left after the payroll cleared. Not without a word, just with a quiet, handwritten note tucked inside the back of her ledger. "No more rescues. No more lies. When you're ready to build something new, you'll know where to find me. I'll be waiting in the blueprint." I hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't posted a thing in the weeks since. And somehow, that had meant more than any declaration ever could. He wasn't chasing her anymore. He was holding space. At noon, Clara stepped out onto the vineyard path with her father's leather-bound portfolio in one hand. The rebranding team had sent logo concepts. She'd reviewed every pitch, every font, every color palette. None of them were right. They were polished, sophisticated, beautiful, but they weren't the Moreau. And they weren't hers. She stopped near the newly rebuilt pergola, the sun slanting through olive branches above her, and opened the folder. Inside were her original notes scribbled on napkins, receipts, the backs of guest comment cards. And beneath them, his sketch, the one he'd handed her under candlelight, the one she'd nearly thrown away, the one that had survived, not just the storm but her pride. It showed the facade of a hotel, half real, half remembered, and in the bottom corner, written in small, careful script, "Moreau Stone." She traced the words with her finger, not as branding, but as truth. That evening, Clara stood in the vineyard just before dusk, watching the shadows stretch over the hills like spilled ink. The staff was closing for the day. The last guests had gone to dinner, and the sky was painted in that impossible shade of gold that only lasted 10 minutes, what her father had called the breath between. And then she heard it. A familiar engine, low, steady gravel crunching on the drive. She turned. Dominic stepped out of a truck this time, not a sedan. Jeans and boots, sleeves pushed up, a leather bag slung over one shoulder. No fanfare, just presence. He walked toward her slowly, eyes steady on hers. Clara didn't speak. Not yet. She let him reach her, let the moment stretch like the space between inhale and exhale. Then she lifted the leather folder between them, opened it, held out the sketch. I want to build this, she said. He stared at it for a moment, the corners of his mouth curving into something quiet. Not a grin. Not relief. Recognition. Clara stepped closer. With you, she said. Not just this sketch. Not just this hotel. Something new. Together. Dominic's voice was low. Careful. Are you sure? Clara nodded. I've never been more sure of anything I didn't plan. And finally she smiled fully this time. He reached out, his hand brushing hers as he took the folder. You know, he said, I wasn't sure if I should come back. She arched a brow. Why did you? Because this place is the first thing I didn't want to leave behind. Their fingers laced slowly, deliberately, like roots growing toward each other underground. Later, they sat beneath the pergola with a bottle of wine from the Moreau's oldest cask. The sky turned violet, then navy. Lanterns flickered above them, casting golden rings over the table. They talked like people who had nothing to hide. About boardrooms and childhoods. About art and silence. About how falling in love wasn't something either of them had planned and how that made it feel more true. When Clara finally leaned her head against his shoulder, Dominic didn't move. He just exhaled and whispered, Tell me this is real. Clara smiled. It is now. The next morning, the blueprints lay across the kitchen island like a shared heartbeat. Dominic stood at the counter, sleeves rolled, espresso in one hand and pencil in the other, sketching revisions. Clara leaned beside him barefoot, notebook open, curls pinned loosely with a pencil she kept forgetting was there. They had spent the last hour drawing what didn't yet exist. A second property. Not a copy of the Moreau, but a sibling, a boutique sanctuary in coastal Carmel, tucked between cliffs and ocean air. A place where stories could live, where history would not be paved over, but preserved. We'll keep the curved archways, Clara said. And the hand-tiled mosaics in every bathroom. Dominic nodded. Natural light in every room. Outdoor fireplaces. No glass towers. Clara glanced up. And no Marcus. He smirked. God, no. That chapter's closed. But she caught the flicker of unease behind his eyes. He hadn't heard from Marcus since the day of the shareholder fallout. Not a call. Not a threat. Just silence. And Dominic didn't trust silence from wolves. That afternoon, the silence broke. It came in the form of an email forwarded by Clara's lawyer. Subject line: Provisional claim against Moreau redevelopment permit, filed by Lang Enterprises. Clara read it twice, then once more, her chest tightening. The claim was legal, posturing Marcus accusing the hotel of violating an obscure clause about historical site alterations during restoration. It was a delay tactic, but if it went through, they'd be tangled in red tape for months. She looked up from the page, heart pounding. Dominic was already standing behind her, reading over her shoulder. His jaw clenched. This is desperation, he muttered. It's leverage, Clara corrected. He wants to delay us, pressure us into settling, maybe sell him a controlling share to make it go away. Dominic's expression darkened. He thinks I'm still the man who would even consider that. Clara turned to him. You're not. But we still have to respond. This could jeopardize everything. I'll handle it. She reached out, touching his arm. We'll handle it. 2 days later, Dominic walked into Marcus's office unannounced. The same office, same glass tower, same leather chairs. Only this time, he didn't sit down. Marcus glanced up from his desk, feigning surprise. Dom. Or do you go by Ghost now? Dominic said nothing. He placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. A legal countersuit, filed jointly under Moreau and Stone Ventures LLC. Marcus skimmed it, eyes narrowing. You're forming a new company? We already did. Marcus laughed. You and her? Dominic folded his arms. We filed a motion to dismiss your claim. The restoration complied with every historical code. You're grasping at sand. She's made you soft. No, Dominic said coldly. She made me honest. Marcus leaned back, smiling. And what happens when this boutique fantasy fails? You'll come back to the real world with your tail between your legs. Dominic took a slow breath. If the real world means lying, manipulating, and tearing down everything sacred, then I don't want to come back." Marcus's smile vanished. "You and I built an empire," Marcus said, "and you threw it away for a woman with a piano in a crumbling hotel." "No," Dominic said, turning to leave. "I threw away a prison, and I found something worth rebuilding." Back in Napa, Clara waited by the phone. When it rang, her stomach flipped. "Hello?" "It's done," Dominic said. He backed off. "No court date. No settlement." He knew we had him boxed. She closed her eyes, relief washing over her in waves. "Thank you," she whispered. He paused. "I did it for us," he said, "but I also did it for me, for who I want to be." That evening, Clara hosted the Moreau's first official reopening dinner. The terrace glowed with lanterns. Long wooden tables were set with stoneware, gold-rimmed glasses, rosemary sprigs folded into linen napkins. Jazz floated softly through the warm air, and laughter bloomed like late spring roses. She wore her mother's necklace. Dominic stood beside her in rolled sleeves and a linen blazer, no tie. They greeted guests not as hostess and investor but as partners. Builders. Founders. Near the end of the evening, Clara stood on a wooden crate beside the fountain and raised a glass. "To those who believed when we didn't," she said. "To those who stayed when it was easier to leave." Her eyes found Dominic's. "And to what we build next." Later, after the last guest had wandered upstairs, Clara and Dominic stood in the empty garden. The vines rustled overhead. Fireflies blinked like distant stars. He took her hand. "Do you remember the first night I stood here?" he asked. "You told me this place wasn't for sale." "I remember," she said. He stepped closer. "It still isn't." She smiled. "But I am," she whispered, sliding her arms around his waist. "At least, my heart is. And I'd like to put it in joint custody." Dominic laughed, soft and full, and kissed her like a sunrise, slow, golden, and full of promise. Chapter 10. A New Foundation. The day of the grand reopening dawned soft and golden. The sky held no trace of the storms that had once threatened to swallow everything. Instead, light spilled over the vineyard in ribbons, catching on the dew-streaked grape leaves, warming the clay roof tiles, and kissing the arches of the newly restored Moreau facade. It was not a resurrection driven by perfection, but one born of patience, labor, and fierce love. Guests began to arrive just after 10. Some were new. Some were familiar. A couple who had celebrated their 50th anniversary here. A novelist who'd written her debut novel in Room 7. A former concierge returning after a decade in France. Every one of them walked through the heavy oak doors and stopped for just a moment to take it all in. The Art Deco mural had been restored, its stormy skies radiant again. The brass banisters gleamed. The scent of bergamot and aged oak drifted from the hallways like memory reborn. Clara stood at the top of the staircase, watching it unfold. She wore a fitted navy dress with a square neckline, and her mother's locket. Her curls were pinned in a half-twist, and her expression so often focused, guarded, was open now. Luminous. At peace. Dominic joined her with 2 glasses of champagne. "You're not crying," he said, quietly impressed. "I will," she replied, taking a flute. "But only after the last guest has gone home and I've counted every receipt." He laughed. "There's my Clara." She sipped, then looked around. "They came," she said. "They always would," he replied. "They just needed someone to show them the light was still on." By noon, the Moreau pulsed with life. Live jazz played from the garden. A sommelier led tastings beneath the pergola. Children ran barefoot across the lawn while parents lounged with glasses of rosé. Inside, guests wandered through the reading room, marveling at the restored piano. Clara stood in the center of it all, no longer holding the hotel up by sheer will. She was held by it now. Every guest, every staff member, every flower arranged in the exact same way her father used to do on opening nights. Each was a stitch in the fabric that had mended itself around her. She caught Dominic watching her from across the room, his eyes full of something unspoken. Admiration. Awe. Love. Later, Clara stepped behind the front desk to retrieve something and found a small, worn envelope tucked beneath the guest book. Her name, written in a slanted, unmistakable hand. Her father's. She froze. Tears stung her eyes before she'd even opened it. Inside was a single piece of notepaper. Old. Faded. But legible. My Clara, if you're reading this, it means the Moreau is still breathing. I always believed you'd save it, not with money but with your stubborn, impossible heart. This place was never about me. It was always for you. And if you've let someone in by now, if someone's beside you in the fight, then I hope he sees you the way I always did. As the fiercest thing this land has ever known. Hold on to the roots, kiddo. But let yourself bloom. Love. Dad. Clara pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. He had known, even then. She didn't sob. There was no collapse. Just a quiet H, and the deepest breath she'd taken in years. That night, the hotel hummed under candlelight. The reopening dinner was held in the vineyard courtyard. Long tables glowed under string lights. Dishes passed hand to hand. Wine flowed, laughter crescendoed. Clara stood with Dominic at the center table, her hand resting over his. Guests toasted them without cue. To the Moreau reborn, one said. To Clara and Dominic, said another. Builders of what lasts. Dominic lifted his glass, but said nothing. Not because he didn't have the words, but because for once he didn't need them. After the dinner, they stole away to the pergola, the very one from Dominic's sketch, now fully built, wrapped in vines and hung with lanterns. Clara wore a shawl over her shoulders, her heels left behind in the grass. She leaned into his side, as they looked out at the hotel, lit up like a dream. You did it, Dominic murmured. No, she said. We did. He turned to her, pressing a kiss into her temple. You know what I want to build next? She looked up at him. Tell me. A life, he said. Here. With you. And maybe someday, a home just off the vineyard. One with a piano. A crooked porch. Maybe a dog that eats half the inventory. She laughed. You want all that? He nodded. Only if it's with you. Clara reached up, fingers threading into his. Then draw it for me, she whispered. And I'll build it. The last guests departed just after midnight. The courtyard still smelled of crushed rosemary and citrus peels, and the lanterns above the pergola flickered like fading stars. A breeze danced through the vineyard, carrying the distant hush of wind through olive trees. Clara stood on the terrace alone, barefoot. The flagstones cool beneath her feet. Behind her, the Moreau glowed warm in the dark, her legacy now not a burden, but a beacon. Her pulse echoed its rhythm. She closed her eyes. She could still feel it. The piano under her fingers, the storm in her throat, Dominic's sketch tucked into her ledger. His hand steadying her during that first landslide. His silence, his failure, his return. Everything had led here. Not to an ending, but to the still, sacred moment before something begins. Inside, Dominic wandered the empty hallways slowly, reverently. The mural glimmered under golden sconces. Each frame on the wall had been cleaned, the brass fixtures polished. But it wasn't just restoration, he saw it was testimony. To her, to them. He reached the conservatory, stepping into the place where he had once kissed her and nearly lost her in the same breath. Now, the room was full of lavender and light. And her, Clara turned as he entered. Their eyes met like tide and moon. She crossed the room toward him, silent and sure. I didn't think I'd find you here, she said. He smiled. It felt like the right place to say what I want to say. Her brows lifted. Which is? He took a deep breath. Clara Moreau, you are the only thing I've ever built from love, instead of fear. The only blueprint I never wanted to redraw. I know we've already started our partnership, but I want to ask you for something more. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Not a ring, but a key, carved from oak, branded with the initials M and S. Clara stared at it. A key? She asked, blinking. To the guest cottage, he said. The one off the west wing. Her heart thudded. You renovated it? He nodded. I filled it with books. Left the piano. Put a kettle on the stove and a lamp by the window where the morning light falls softest. It's yours. Ours. A place with no ledgers. No meetings. Just Kayat. She took the key from his palm slowly, carefully, then looked up at him. You want me to live with you in a cottage across from my hotel? She teased. He smiled. I want to live with you. Wherever you'll have me. Clara exhaled, chest tightening with something that felt like surrender and home all at once. I never imagined, she said, that I'd find love in the ruins. Dominic touched her cheek. Then let's not call them ruins anymore. Let's call them foundations. She leaned forward and kissed him, not like the first time, not like a question. This kiss was an answer. Warm, unhurried, unbreakable. Weeks passed. Then months. And the Moreau became the flagship of a quiet revolution. Moreau and Stone launched 2 boutique hotels, one by the cliffs in Carmel, another inside a restored train station in the Catskills. Each space told a story. Each was a resurrection. Clara handled design and preservation. Dominic handled outreach and strategy. Neither sacrificed what they loved. Instead, they made room. One rainy morning, almost a year to the day since the first storm, Clara walked into the conservatory barefoot, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Dominic was seated at the piano. He had taken up playing again. Poorly, but earnestly. She placed a mug beside him, slid onto the bench, and rested her head against his shoulder. The rain tapped gently on the glass above. He played a few notes, then stopped. I used to think love had to be loud, he said. Grand. Obvious. Clara smiled. And now? I think it's this. He played again. A melody slow and imperfect, but beautiful in its shape. Clara didn't correct his notes. She just closed her eyes and listened. 1 year later, they married in the vineyard beneath the pergola. There were no microphones, no fanfare, just close friends, the scent of lavender, and a string quartet playing softly as the sun dipped behind the hills. Dominic wore a linen suit. Clara wore her mother's watch, her father's initials sewn into her sleeve. She said, I do like a woman not giving anything away, but choosing clearly, irrevocably, to build, to love, to stay. And on their wedding night, as they stood beneath the stars, Dominic turned to her and said, I used to tear things down to feel powerful. Clara took his hand. And now? He looked at her. I build with you to feel real. And in the quiet that followed, the storm that had once started everything felt at last far, far away. Just part of the soil, where new roots now grew. Together,